Hello and welcome to the BC Christian Collective podcast called No Time for Silence. And the British East and Southeast Asian Christian Collective we are a grassroots movement that seeks to serve and represent British EC communities, Christians and churches. So I am your host, Wayne Fung, and we've been doing this group for quite some time now. I think probably around mid-October. We've got quite a number of members in this pilot group to learn about our identity, be a place of courageous conversation to support healing and encourage us and to empower mission as God calls us to do. And we really believe that we need to start with ourselves. We really want to address injustices in our world, to transform our community, in our own communities and also outwards in God's society. And one thing we've been talking about recently, it's this whole thing about this unspoken conspiracy of silence in our communities, where we don't even know is happening, but people don't like to talk about difficult topics. So this podcast is all about breaking that silence, allowing people to speak, and for those who hear will feel empowered. And on this episode, we have Amy Tan. I'm so glad to have Amy speaking to us today. And she's Malaysian Chinese in the UK. But I would like you to really ask Amy, introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
Thank you so much, Wayne, for having me. This is actually my very first time on a podcast, so so I hope I don't waffle. But it's a real privilege and an honor to be part of this podcast. And so yes, my name is Amy. I moved to the UK with my husband and my son, who's now 8 years old, about almost 5 years ago now. So my son has spent more than half of his life here. So I am currently on doing ordination training to become a priest in the Church of England. Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of things going on. So
Yeah.
you grew up. You grew up in Malaysia, but your child,
Yeah.
the son, most of our life is here, and you're
Yeah.
doing like your ordination training. Wow, that's amazing. And right, tell us more about your heritage then, about your life in Malaysia, and what is it like being here and growing up as well.
Um, well, to be very honest with you, I think because I grew up in a country where there was a very strong sense of nationalism. Um, how we identify as Chinese is very different from how a Chinese from China would or a Chinese from Hong Kong would identify themselves. So for me, my Chineseness, growing up came from just the different festivals that we celebrated from Chinese New Year and from the kind of food that we ate to probably the values of like respect to elders, filial piety, that kind of thing, all those like Confucianism life lessons that we learned growing up. But in terms of like understanding what our heritage is, like where our like the the ancestral background that preceded us, like things like that, none of those we were able to understand. My husband doesn't even know where his grandparents came from, that sort of
Mm.
thing. So there's like this whole like blur from before his parents' time. So he just knows that his father is of the Teochew dialect, but where his father's parents and grandparents came from, he has no idea. So he doesn't know where home is, quote unquote, where home is. So it's things like that. Like I know roughly, like my mom's side, they came from Toisan.
Mm.
Whereas my dad, he has no idea. That sort of thing. And I think it's because they never asked, because it was a lot of like, how do we survive as immigrants in Malaysia? It was not so much of like, oh, you must understand where we came from. It's more of like, okay, these are the cultures, these are the values that we have. These are passed down from our parents. Okay, this is what you know, and then how do you survive in as an immigrant in Malaysia, that sort of thing. So I think growing up Malaysian Chinese, it was quite like a subconscious identity crisis for me, because I grew up during a time where there was this whole culture of imperialism and white supremacy that was really strong. So grew up in
Mm.
a time, my parents grew up in a time where the British had just left Malaysia as a colony. So you can imagine the kind of impact that it had for them and their families. So unbeknownst to us, we were kind of conditioned to believe that West is best.
Wow.
Yeah, so our parents didn't think that didn't think that it was important for us to learn anything other than English. And obviously, because we were in Malaysia, we had to learn Malay as well. So a lot of people in my generation, like they we didn't speak Chinese. Like I learned a little bit because my mom was Cantonese, my dad was Hokkien, so I learned a little bit of those. And also because a lot of us went to Malay school, so everything was taught in Malay except for the English subject itself. And you will only be able to speak English if either your parents intentionally spoke Chinese to you, or they didn't speak
Mm.
English, and because Chinese is their first language. So I remember always being called a banana because I'm Chinese on the outside, but I'm white on the inside. So in some sense, it also made me feel like that was the ideal way to be, like which is to be as white as possible. Yeah, and so it made me feel ashamed of my Chinese heritage sometimes. And I remember that I remember we had a very like strong class distinction that was inherent in the school system. For example, like we were streamed according to how well we did in school based on what kind of grades we got or what position in the class we were in. And so the not so smart ones, as they were called, they were in like lower classes, and so
Right.
most of them didn't have a good command of the English language. Yeah, so it was, yeah, that was the kind of culture that I grew up in. And I remember one time, I was walking um, with a classmate of mine, and we passed by one of these classes during break time in the lower classes, and
Mm.
she just looked inside and she saw this girl, and she just went like, "Wow, li Thai li ko lala muy more classy." Like I remember word for word what she said, and I was just stunned, but because I really didn't know what to say. But that's exactly the kind of classism we had growing up, when you have that kind of education system where what you're essentially saying is that these students, if they stay in those spaces, like they pretty much don't have much of a future in their careers if they didn't have the best education. um yeah, so that was, yeah, that was pretty much
Wow.
the Malaysia that I grew up in. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Wow. That's
Yeah.
so it's not only a normal kind of like hierarchy, uh,
Mm.
but it's also connected to the colonial past,
Yeah.
and there's an inferiority kind of complex going on there. So it's almost consciously that if you are more westernized, more leaning towards a colonialized kind of way and whiteness kind of way of thinking
Yeah.
or being, it's almost like it's kind of better and kind of affected
Yeah.
you or your generations of people, how they might even think and behave. Now obviously I'm not here to criticize or say, oh, one is better than the other, what is right or wrong in a way,
Yeah.
because I mean how you feel about a generation, what they've done is one thing, but I'm
Yeah.
sure that in older generation they have their reasons and um motivation for why they did what they
Yeah.
did. Yeah, and they're not
Yeah.
here to talk about it themselves, so I don't know what they will say about it. But nonetheless,
Mm.
it has, like you said, shaped how you feel about yourself or the Chinese culture. You even said you feel like a banana and you're ashamed of the Chinese culture. Yeah, but it sounds
Mm.
like in that when you're younger, being known as a banana almost like a positive thing.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I mean, it was shameful in the sense that, we couldn't speak our own mother tongue, but it was still like something to be proud of, because like, wow, she speaks such good English. Even when we come here, when we go to the West, and then people ask where we're from, and I say, "Oh, we're from Malaysia," and they're like, "Oh, but you speak English so well." There's that like immediate expectation that if you didn't grow up in a Western country, like you would have a really poor command of the English language.
Wow.
Yeah, that sort of thing. So I think that really just translates, and it carries on for years to come, because in Malaysia, like the one thing that's very very apparent is like the wealthy upper class privileged part of society continues to display that kind of superior behavior. So you can see that a lot in on social media, in like Malaysian accounts, like and where people just flaunt their riches, and that's where their self-worth comes from, where everybody feels like there is a need to compete, to see who has the bigger car, who has the nicer house. Like you needed to show off your achievements and successes to the highest visibility possible. And it was a very very high pressure society to grow up in, which is one of the reasons why we felt a lot more at ease when we moved here, actually, because the Brits generally are very understated, and so sometimes you can't tell, like, oh, how much money they really have. But in Malaysia, it's like you can tell when people are really well to do, when they come from the higher echelons of society. So it's a very yeah, it's not a very healthy society to grow up in, if I'm being honest. Yeah.
Yeah. But interesting thing is each society, each culture have their own unhealthy traits. And
Yeah.
only when you go to a different place, you see contrast and you see, wow, their unhealthy thing is not my unhealthy thing. And I
Yeah.
can thrive a bit more because they don't have my problem, and I can learn from what we perceive to be more positive part of it. And that's definitely how I perceive when I have come back to the West, to UK, and I see like certain things are really different and really positive, like being relational, being more authentic, and talk about things, and talk about saying, being, I don't know, ask for forgiveness and saying sorry. I thought, wow, showing love, those are things like you don't explicitly see.
Yeah.
But what you
Yeah.
mentioned is also fascinating, because whether it's in the British culture or even you as an Asian Malaysian culture, you're all reacting out of some kind of like problem and pain, and you over kind of like function in that way, isn't it? To compensate for what there's a lack of maybe security or worth as a person.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and to,
Yeah.
yeah, some will underplay it because don't flaunt it. Some will be, let's show more and fight and
Yeah.
achieve and do things. Yeah, and that shape you.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
my question will be, now that you are here and your family, you're all here, um, when you come to the UK, you don't leave all that behind. Yeah, they're part of you, part of your whole being. Yeah, and also
Yeah.
other people in a similar situation as you, from Malaysia, for example, are here. How do you think that will affect people like yourself in your community in the UK?
Um. So if you're talking like in terms of how we perceive ourselves, our personal outlook, I think, for example, my husband and I have very different opinions of how we get by in a completely different country. So like, for example, I'm more of like, I will call it out when I feel like there's some sort of microaggression put on me, or anything like that. If I'm not comfortable with something, like, I will voice it out. If I feel like I'm made to feel inferior because I'm ethnic minority, I'm an Asian woman, like, I would immediately call it out and say, this is not right, we need to do something about it. Whereas my husband would say something like, oh, but we were always kind of made to feel that way when we were in Malaysia, because we were already, like, we were immigrants to begin with. And because of that very strong sense of nationalism in the country, certain groups were made to feel like they are the superior ones, and we are like, oh, we're just the hardworking Chinese who who just need to accept the status quo, whatever, especially when it comes to government policies that don't favor us. It's like, yeah, it's just the way it always has been. So we just need just to be silent, be compliant, and just get on with life. Because we work hard anyway, so we will be able to succeed somehow. But I think coming here, I feel like that has to change because we're in a space where there is a lot more freedom of speech, because where we came from, there wasn't much freedom of speech. You get into trouble for complaining about things. Like you can get persecuted. That's a whole new story. A story for another day. But yeah, over here it's like you can actually have a voice. I think so. That's why ever since I moved here, I've been able to kind of like find my voice. Um, and so yeah, that's been very helpful for me. And I don't know that many Malaysians here, but the ones that I know, I feel like that's kind of like their outlook in life. That's like, which is like, I'm just gonna do what I need to do, and I'll be able to get by. What's the point of complaining? What's the point of being louder in this country? Like I'm here as a foreigner, so I have to accept that I will never be I will never have equal opportunity, and I will never have the privileges that white people, for example, have here.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
really, really painful and powerful at the same
Mm,
time. Um, yeah, so it's like even though you people have come to a different place, the environment, yeah, but you still carry that with you. And
yeah.
this, as you talk about this whole idea, like being a foreigner, even some may feel, and a lot of Asians feel the same way. Immigrants,
Mm,
they feel like there's some perpetual foreigner. Yeah,
mm,
and whether there's true experience or not, but at least they feel that way, and they don't feel like able to fit in.
mm,
And when you talk about that, it reminded me, even in the Bible, you have, it's a bit like when you're trapped in something like Israel escaping
mm,
Egypt. Yeah, so it's one
mm.
thing for Israel to leave, get away from Egypt, but it's another for Israel to kind of get the Egypt out of themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can leave the place, but the Egypt is still in you.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and we can
Mm,
have that, carry it with us, and we try to project that onto other things, and we still carry that. And obviously, our environment can change a bit of how we see things because
mm,
we see, experience different things around us. But
mm.
it takes a lot. But I guess what would it take for somebody to be really aware of these things and able to grow to a point of change and transformation and redeeming their culture?
Mm. I think I think for me, like being with people who have already kind of like cultivated the habit of being self-aware, like, yes, okay, I am an immigrant in this country, and I acknowledge that there are a lot of challenges that come with it, uh, but I will not be silenced, and I will not be silent myself. Like, I will voice out some of these things that are problematic for me, and I will be a kind of like a support network to other people who go through similar experiences as well. And I think that's so key. Just that self-awareness, just that acknowledgement that it's not gonna be easy, but there needs to be change. I think that's the first step. And then just to like be proactive, just I like being part, like getting to know you, like, and Ellen, your wife, who is an incredibly perceptive woman. I and I got to know you guys, I remember, through Mark Nam, whom I think I would speak about later on. It is through like being proactive, like knowing that, okay, I have the opportunity to get to know these people, like I need to make the effort to get to know you guys better and to hear your experiences, learn from you, because I have a lot to learn. And it's been very helpful for me. I think that these are all just really practical steps. It doesn't take too much, really, because we are all a lot more connected now because of the wonderful world of Zoom and online meetings and conferences and all that. So I think that's really helpful.
Yeah, that is so true. That is so really, really true. I think authenticity, so being true to yourself and being true to how you want to communicate yourself, and self-awareness is so important. And they are really kind of like doorways to transformation. Yeah. So
Yeah.
we all want change. So it's Christian faith. We talk about change and transformation and redemption, isn't it? Yeah. So it's not merely just a salvation level, but the whole being being transformed and redeeming every part of our culture.
Yeah.
About, I mean, talks about the Bible talks about how how there's an unveiling of what has been covered, and we grow in transforming to becoming His image in ever increasing glory. Yeah, and that's needed, isn't it? Yeah, and being true to those things are so important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Indeed. Mm.
that's very good. Right. Well, let's we'll come back to these something like kind of intense topic in a minute, but let me go to something a bit tasty. Let's go something more tasty in a way. Yeah. So last time when in our growth group, every week, every time we have different topics. So last time you facilitated a topic on food. So food is such an important thing in East and Southeast Asian culture. Yeah. But I want to ask you really, why do you think food is so important in our culture?
I, I think, funnily enough, I think it's because it's probably the only time we actually sit down and talk to each other. I
Do
mean,
we?
now I think okay, when I was growing up, that was definitely it. It wouldn't be like, hey everyone, let's get around, the living room and let's have a chat. There wasn't. I don't remember any of that. It was because I I don't know if this is the same everywhere else during my time, but in Malaysia, it's very common for Chinese families to only really talk over a meal. And so I remember growing up in my extended family, whether it be like when we get together during holidays, like Chinese New Year, whatever, we would do only two things. Like we would eat and talk while we eat or watch TV. Only those two
Hmm.
things. Like my grandparents loved watching Chinese opera, and I don't have that many vivid memories of my childhood, but the Chinese opera is something I can definitely remember. But yeah, so food was and still is really important to us. So I mean obviously my mom, okay, my mom and her sisters would talk regularly. But I remember growing up when it was like the whole extended family, it was very much so over meals. And my husband's family even more so, like they they don't open up very much. They're not a very emotionally connected family in that sense. They're not the like pour their heart out, like crying, like I mean now it's a lot more, but I remember growing up, I'm sorry, I'm not growing up. I remember when I first met them, it was like all very like, very very general topics, like talking about, the government, talking about, the economy, that sort of thing, but there weren't really like heart to heart talks. So and that's actually a very common scene in a Malaysian Chinese family. um
Hmm.
so yeah, so I yeah, but okay, back to food. So my mom's family, they were she came from a family of amazing cooks, so I think that's why food was really something that I remember the most about growing up. So every meal was like a huge feast. Like until today, whenever my mom cooks for the family, like it's always 6 to 7 dishes each time. And food in Malaysia, especially because we have an amazing array of food. So with a lot of influence from like Chinese and Indian immigrants fused together with Malay food. We always joke that Malaysians live to eat. So we eat all day long, and suppers are like a big thing in Malaysia. When we get like even when we greet each other, we ask like, have you eaten yet? Like
Hmm.
lasik bao mei. Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah.
That is so true. I mean, English
Mm.
will ask you about, oh, it's a bit cold today, isn't it? Oh,
Yeah.
well, because
How's the weather?
how's the weather? And the book Watching the English talks about why do English people like to talk about weather all the time.
The
It's not
weather.
really as if the weather is really that fascinating. I mean, like there are some season, but not really. I mean, it's pretty much similar. I mean, like it's kind of like you know what it is. But they
Yeah.
talk about how they just use weather as a way to talk to people, as
Yeah.
opener, to invite, solicit kind of like conversation. But I think Asians
Yeah.
would use food as like, oh, have you eaten yet? Yeah,
Yeah.
as a way of conversation. But it kind of like, can you go deeper than that, isn't it? I mean, it's opening.
Yeah.
So quickly, so you got this rich Asian heritage culture of like food and
Yeah.
everything around it. So when
Mm.
you come to the UK and you see
Mm.
Western culture and other non-Asian people, how
Mm.
do you perceive their food culture? What kind of like thing that really shocked you?
Um, well, I mean I can share from like my own perspective of my food culture compared to their food culture. Like for me, coming from Malaysia, uh, fellowship through hospitality is really important to us. And so and it's kind of like a gift that we have, like we're just naturally hospitable, where we're like, oh, would you like to come over for dinner, and not just one but two, three, four, five times kind of thing. So so and that's something that I've seen here, that's not a part of their culture, where people most of the time over here they're like, oh, would you like to go for drinks, it's always about the drinks. Would you like to hang out at the pub or this sort of thing. But to be invited for a meal, it is rare. So I've and and it's fine, because I feel like I've kind of like been able to find um to be able to use my gifts in that way. So for example, I've been able to make so many friends since moving to the UK, because we've made the effort to invite people over to our place for dinner, and it means a lot to them, because it's not really part of their culture to have dinners regularly in someone's place, and if they're not really close friends. And even close friends, again, they go for drinks, right? They don't
Hmm.
really go to each other's house, and you have like huge meals, that kind of thing. So you yeah, so
and
um
and meet your family.
yeah, and meet the family, that's right. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. It's
So
not like just like, hey, you be my friend, I'll give you buy you a cake and or whatever, a drink. But you're gonna be
yeah,
my
yeah.
friend, you come and see my family.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So like for example, there was a family who we invited a few Sundays ago, and the wife was saying like, wow, I don't think anybody has actually invited my whole family for dinner before. It's really nice, because he said if they do get invited, it's like just the two of them, just husband and wife. But he say like it's so nice that you
Mm,
invited
mm,
our whole
mm.
family, and not just their family, that there were like three, four other families as well that we invited. And it's such a big part of our culture. It's like it yes, it's time consuming to cook, but we enjoy it because that's what we do. So in that regard,
Yeah.
I feel like there is a space for us as Asians to really minister to people in this country, because more often than not, like what's missing, especially in big cities like London, is that fellowship element.
Mm.
Yeah.
How much do you think our Asian culture, like that distinct about food and hospitality, how much of
Mm.
it do you think aligns with our biblical kind of culture? Yeah, so in scripture describes the whole kind of like cultural landscape in the Bible and the heritage of the people there. Yeah, and the nature of the gospel as well. How much
Mm.
do you think our culture can align and connect well with that Christian perspective?
Mm. I I think the first thing that comes to mind is, for example, like Jesus ate with people who were not like him, who were not like others who were usually around him. So with like with sinners, so I'm not so my point here is not that I invite only sinners, like people who are like outcasts, but as in like people who are not like me. So I think there's something powerful in people seeing that they're invited even though they're not a very close friend, it's like you can just randomly like, hey, would you like to come to my house for a meal? And it makes them realize that, wow, I'm not even like your really close friend. Like you barely know me. I'm new here, or I haven't particularly been nice to you, or I've not invited you, but you are inviting me. And so I think um that is really being like Jesus, is
Hmm.
that you're not allowing space for people who are just like you, but you're accepting people who are, wouldn't expect you to want to make them feel welcome. I think that's so important,
Hmm.
uh, because I've been, I mean, some of my experiences, being in London has been one whereby if if there is a social gathering, I'm usually someone who is like kind of like in the corner, because I'm not like the rest of the people in the social gathering.
Hmm.
And I feel like that can be very isolating. And so for us, yeah, we're not like that. So I think that really shows God's love when you actually make the effort to be with people who are not like you.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
so really, really good because I think this is where this is a part of our culture, Southeast Asian culture, especially as Christians.
Mm,
I think it's really worth celebrating when
mm,
it's aligns well with our Christian heritage, when it's
mm.
seen through the lens of the gospel. I
Yeah.
think it's really powerful. It's something natural to us, and also I think
Mm,
in the West, where people might be less kind of like group or collective mentality, more individualistic. I think they can really powerful way of showing a different side of the gospel, and people can learn from
mm.
from us as well. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I'm boldly saying you as an Asian, like you said, as a minority or a minoritized person,
Yeah.
people can learn from us.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
think things
Absolutely.
about us we can really highlight that is really relational societally kind of broken when we don't invite and be hospitable to people.
Mm,
But in our culture, we find it quite easy to do so. Like
mm,
emotionally, we might not quite be quite open, but
mm,
relationally, we be
mm.
open our homes to people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, next
Yeah.
question would be
That's
interesting
right.
because what do you think in our culture, knowing that it's hospitality and food kind of connects with the gospel. What do you think, in spite of that, but it actually needs redeeming if it's to be powerful? If we see it through the gospel, what about our culture, especially with food and hospitality? Yeah, that needs transforming and redeeming to make it fully kind of a more gospel kind of centric.
Um, that's a really good question. I think I think for me, we need to we need to gain our voice. Um, I really do think so, because like if you're talking about how vocal we are in terms of like issues of, our personal identity, mental health, racism, these are conversations I think in the past we've not been really been a part of. We are usually the more silent, more compliant group, and we come from a culture that doesn't like to rock the boat. Very stay in your lane, don't complain, you'll be fine. But that really shouldn't be the case anymore, because it's exactly the silence that helps perpetuate this long
Mm.
standing culture of imperialism and racial or even national supremacy. So if we don't speak out, if we don't like name these like internalized lies about our identity, we're not bold enough to speak out about all these explicit acts of, whether it's maybe racism or unconscious bias or microaggressions, like how are people going to be re-educated? So I think in that sense that would really help bring allow us to feel like, yeah, we can be part of like carrying the gospel in our churches, because we are also as passionate about social justice. And Jesus was passionate about social justice, absolutely. And so
Mm.
I think to be able to like regain that voice, or for many people even to gain a voice, I think that's really important.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. As you describe it, I think it's like we can be very good at opening our mouths,
Mm.
but opening our mouths for eating.
That's right.
So, I mean, talk about speaking out, but we open our mouth, but it's for consuming,
Yeah.
ingesting, digesting, and they're all
Yeah.
good for hospitality. And is in the way we use our food and everything else as welcoming is
Mm.
great for the for put things on the table. Yeah. So the
Mm.
banquet on the table, inviting for things very transforming, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
But who gets to come to the table when people are being blocked?
Mm. Yeah.
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 And how do we
Exactly.
use our mouths?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very important. So the paradox, the contrast is, as Asian, we use our mouths in one way, but then we're not using it in the other way.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it
It's
needs a balance. Yeah, some will
yeah.
easily speak out, but they
Mm.
don't use it for a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we
Yeah.
need to find ways to learn from one another. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, especially I don't know about you, but where I came from is it's always like even until today, my mom my mom would say things like, "Oh, just keep quiet, just keep quiet, don't anger people, they might see you as aggressive or feisty or rebellious," that sort of thing. So I think it's so important that we acknowledge that there are changes that need to be made. We
Mm,
can't just maintain the status quo because
yeah.
like I said, how are people going to be re-educated? It's not going to happen that way.
Yeah, but that's an
Yeah.
interesting point because even the thing about not wanting to rock the boat, and
Yeah.
that's to do with obviously harmony
Yeah.
and making sure things are okay, and that's really ingrained in our
Mm.
culture. But that's
Yeah.
connected to even food because we just not just eat
Mm.
by ourselves, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
there's etiquette in food, there's social kind of values, and that's about kind of familial and community harmony that come to eat together. Yeah, so
Mm.
the exact same thing that binds us together can sometimes stop us from speaking beyond and might break or unintentionally or maybe for temporary time might break the harmony. Yeah, but
Mm.
breaking the harmony, it's okay because actually it's for a greater good, for greater
That's right.
harmony and unity. Yeah, and
Yeah.
then we need to kind of bridge out to able to both to do that. Yeah.
Mm. Mm.
Um,
That's right.
our time is coming up to the end very soon.
Mm.
Um, uh, One of the questions I ask people at the end all the time is what would encouragement would you give to our listeners and other East and Southeast Asian people out there, knowing that as a global majority group in the UK, we're small,
Mm.
but also being Christian, and if you're East and Southeast Asian, or even smaller. Yeah, and if you don't
Mm.
go to East and Southeast Asian church, yeah, so you might be a
Yeah.
even more minority in those spaces. But
Mm.
what encouragement would you give to our listeners who might be East or Southeast Asian Christians out there?
Mm. Come and join us and you're set for life. No.
No,
We
join
are.
join Jesus, then you are set for life. Yeah, and then have a community that is
And then join us.
yeah.
No, no, jokes aside, I think be proactive. I would say like it's very easy as East and Southeast Asians for us to suppress what we're going through, and that's why mental health is still very much highly stigmatized in Malaysia, sorry, in Asia and yeah, in countries like Malaysia. So it's not a sign of weakness to show that you need help, whether it's from a mental health professional or being part of a focus slash support group. So I think if I had not made that effort to like contact Mark Nam, for example, and say, hey, I'm struggling, I'm really, really struggling. Like, is there a group that you know of that consists of like people like me who's also a Christian or not, doesn't matter. And he's like, yes, I know this group. And then he invited me to join that first meeting that you guys had. And I remember the first time just listening to all of you. There were quite a number of us. I remember that time. just listening to all of you, and my husband was on the side there, and he was listening so intently, and then after the whole meeting had finished, he was like, "Who are these people?" He was so impressed. He was like, "They're amazing! Like it's so good that you got to meet them." And I said, "Yeah, I know, right?" And so I think it's so encouraging to know that there are groups like that where we can really just hear from each other, learn from each other, relate to one another, feel that very much needed sense of belonging, where we wouldn't be able to get it anywhere else typically. Yeah.
That is so true. Oh, well, I'm so glad that you have been able to connect with Mark and uh,
Mm.
get to know you. And well, I mean, I get blessed by your food, obviously, and your husband's food as well. But I'm blessed by your
My
presence,
husband's
by
food,
your
my husband.
yeah, by your experience, by your input, and all the things you've been sharing, how you're growing, and yeah.
Mm.
So it's amazing. It's really really good. And I think what you said is also really true. Um, for those who find it hard to voice out, isn't it? I think it's good to define a space to do so. One thing I've
Yeah.
always amazed by what people like yourself in a group is you find it such enriching and such a blessing to have a space to alternative space to be yourself and
Mm.
talk about things like this, and which I find
Mm.
surprising because I think I'm just surprised how lonely it can be, whether you guys are in a ethnic or normal kind of like non-ethnic church. It can still be very isolated kind of experience. You don't have a space to really be yourself and talk about certain things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are listeners
Mm.
out there. Do you feel like that? Do you reach out to us and find ways to kind of process and talk about things? And our
Mm.
dream is to kind of like model upon this kind of thing and multiply this kind of work. Yeah, to have groups like this
Mm.
would be really good. Yeah, but do speak out like Amy have said, and learn and grow, and it'd be really important. Yeah,
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
great. Any last words?
Um, Not really. It's just that this has been really great, Wayne. Thanks for inviting me. I think, like I mentioned before we started, it's so good to be able to beforehand just formulate some of my thoughts, coming into this and like, okay, what am I gonna say, and what am I passionate about, and what have I always wanted to say, but I've not had an opportunity, like I wasn't given a space for this. So I think it's so important to do that, for people like
Mm.
us who feel like we have a voice, but we have no chance to actually share some of our thoughts. So yeah, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very
Yeah.
much. So, well, thank you for being here, Amy, and thank you for
Mm.
listening to our BC Christian Collective podcast. And I hope this podcast is really going to help you begin a journey to redeem your Asian identity in Christ and find your voice as an East and Southeast Asian and really be
Mm.
on mission with Jesus as he calls you to be. So, thank you and goodbye.
Bye.